One of the DM's hardest and most important jobs is to structure the adventure so that it is fun for the players to play through. Important because the structure more or less decides what happens to the characters and where they go, and thus also what the DM needs to prep. Hard because it's very easy to mess it up and either make your own life and preparation overly complicated or cause the players to become frustrated, bored, and restless. There's one approach, a simple blueprint that I follow, which works for nearly any campaign and keeps my prep manageable and my players engaged. I call this approach the open railroad, and it's the philosophy that's guided all the work we've done to make campaigns such as Baldur's Gate, Descent into Avernus, and Icewind Dale: Rime of the Frostmaiden easy to run in our DM's resources. But before we get into that, let's first take a quick look at the two most well-known ways to structure a D&D campaign: the railroad and the sandbox. A railroad structure is, as the name implies, when the adventure is on rails. Like a book, play, or movie script, the character's quest takes them from scene to scene, location to location, A to B to C to D, as if it was a train going on rails. This approach has the benefit of making preparation easier for the DM, as you always know exactly what to prepare. It also allows for a more cohesive story, where the characters and the players always know what they're doing and where they're going, and thus keeps them engaged. The biggest downside to this approach is that it can feel stifling to the players, especially if they start to get the sense that their actions have no impact on what's going on. They may start to feel less like contributors to a shared storytelling experience and more like characters in a novel that's already written. In severe cases, this can actually cause players to disengage and become detached from the story because they resent being steered through a linear and thus less exciting story. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the sandbox. A sandbox structure is thus named because it's like dumping a kid into a sandbox and letting them build whatever they want. The D&D equivalent is that the characters are placed in a world that includes set locations and maybe even some plot hooks, but no clear sense of direction is given to them. There may be an overarching plot or a great event, such as the invasion of an army or the second coming of the Dragon Queen Tiamat, but it is up to the characters how, why, and even if they get involved with the plot. The greatest benefit of the sandbox is that it gives the players a high degree of autonomy and agency. What they do and where they go is completely up to them, and their choices will shape what happens. The downside of this approach is that it usually involves a lot more work for the DM, especially if you're not a master of improvisation or you don't have a large catalog of content to draw on. Because the player characters can do anything, the DM must be prepared for everything. Secondly, the extreme degree of agency can actually lead to decision paralysis in some players because there are no handrails. They end up confused about what they're supposed to do and end up frustrated and disengaged. While the downsides of both the railroad and sandbox approach can be mitigated by a seasoned DM who knows their players well, I find that most players enjoy an approach that lies somewhere in the middle. This middle approach is what I call the open railroad, where we combine the railroad's more manageable prep and clear sense of purpose with the sandbox's feeling of freedom and autonomy. Where the railroad typically is defined by only having one available option at each juncture, and the sandbox has infinite options available at each step of the journey, the number of options available to the characters with an open railroad structure fluctuates as the adventure progresses, but should always stay in that 1 to 5 range and aiming for that magical number of 3 available options. So instead of going from A to B to C to D to E as the railroad structure might, the open railroad instead goes from A to either B, C, or D, and from one of those 3 options to 2 more options, and then the track narrows down and back into the E option. Instead of being strung along the adventure's path without any opportunity to change the course, the players are given the ability to change tracks at critical junctures, which will affect how the journey unfolds and what happens, but not completely change the adventure's story and end goal. Right now I'm writing an adventure for our upcoming book Milando's Guide to Magical Marvels. In this adventure, the characters have to discover what's causing magic to go rampant and mages to disappear in a larger city and put an end to it. The railroad structure for this adventure would be: A, the characters are attacked by a wild magic ooze in the streets and are hired by the city guard to fix what's going on. B, the characters investigate the College Arcana and learn who's behind the attacks. C, the characters investigate the culprit's house and learn he's tampering with a dangerous artifact in the Zeros. And D, the characters go to the Zeros and stop the culprit. Now, if we were using the sandbox structure, we prepare a few more locations in the city, let's say a tavern, a mad merchant of magic, and a temple of magic, and we'll let the characters meander about until they stumble on the plot and figure out how it's supposed to be solved. In the open railroad approach, we fuse the two to create a structure that instead looks something like this. A, the characters are attacked by a wild magic use in the streets and are hired by the city guard to fix what's going on, just like in the railroad structure, but then open up the railroads and have the guard captain suggest that the characters visit either the College Arcana, speak with patron patrons at the local tavern, or visit the Goddess of Magic's temple to learn more. And then each of these 3 locations can lead to the 2 other locations and also either a mad merchant of magic or the culprit's house, and here they can learn about the culprit and his evil plan, and then be led to the sewers where they can go and stop the culprit. With this structure we don't have the complete aimlessness of the sandbox, but also not the linear feel of the railroad. Instead, the characters are outfitted with a clear sense of purpose and information about their possible options, and those are the essential components of the open railroad, which is what will keep the players engaged and motivated, and also feeling like they have freedom and agency while keeping your preparation to a minimum. The best thing about this approach is that it is relatively easy to implement, as it often just involves adding a few options or restructuring how already existing options are presented. Whether you're running a published adventure or your own homebrew campaign, you just need to challenge yourself to either open up the railroad if the adventure is too linear, or lay down some tracks if the adventure is too sandboxy. If there's only one way for the characters to get from A to B, think about how you can provide additional ways the characters can get there. Another NPC that knows about the ancient artifact, another location that was also attacked by the dragon, or another tribe of goblinoids that could also be behind the sabotage. If the adventure has too many options and the players have no way to figure out which ones to choose or even why they're choosing, make an effort to introduce an NPC that can list 3 viable options for places to learn more, or put in an encounter that steers them toward either location A or B. Finally, don't be afraid to let your adventure be a sandbox or a railroad when you need to, or that's what's most fun. Sometimes there is only one option, because going to the dragon's lair is, after all, where the final battle with the dragon is supposed to take place. And sometimes letting the players come up with their own solutions completely on their own is fun, especially if they already know what problem they're trying to solve, or they've let you know that they have some ideas of their own. So that's the video about the open railroad, a topic that was chosen by our patrons over at patreon.com/eventyr. If you want to support the channel and help decide what videos we make and get access to an archive full of awesome 5e content, consider becoming a patron. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot left to say except thank you for watching, and I hope that I'll see you in the next video.